Alrighty everyone, hello, and welcome back to yet another episode of my nonsense. It's just a little bit today, I think, of B-Lock's nonsense. B-Lock being my pigeon, so if you hear any of these hoople-doople noises, that's just him being a pain in my ass. Baby, come on! There he There he is! But, filming this on Thanksgiving, so happy Turkey Day to you all. I got my classics out to bring to a friend's house. Got that pomegranate sangria, delicious, beautiful, wonderful, fantastic. And also, the pumpkin cheesecake bars I posted on my blog a little while back, so those are fucking delicious. Y'all should really grab a couple of those. All that aside though, we have talked now about Advent. We have talked previously before, and don't worry, we will talk again about Christmas and Yule and the typical neo-pagan mess that always goes on with that. But one thing that doesn't get talked about too much, likely because it's still very heavily associated specifically with like Scandinavian countries, especially Sweden, is St. Lucy's Day, and that is something very fun, very important. But before we get into all that, again, hello, my name is Sarah Stresen. I am a Christian witch content creator, writer, educator, and specifically a writer of this book right here, Discovering Christian Witchcraft. Yeah, baby. Anyway, if you're staring at me in confusion and shock, wondering how the hell Christian and witch go in the same sentence, that's literally what this entire book is about. So before you do, as many often like to do on my page, which is just quote a bunch of verses that no doubt came up on Google, instead pause, take a second, and consider checking out this book, because we do cover all those verses and the socio-political context, the linguistic context, the historical context of what's actually going on in them, as well as, you know, folk traditions that happened after the Bible was written, like, you know, that 2,000 years between Jesus dying and coming back and today, and a whole lot of other stuff about how all this makes sense together. I come in from a Southern European, specifically Slovenian Catholic background, and my co-writer coming from an Appalachian Pentecostal background also means that we get a lot of breadth, I guess, in the Christian tradition here and the magical stuff that happens across various denominations. And keep in mind that we also have the sequel coming out on December 30th. I just finished doing all the edits for this last night at 1 in the morning, so I'm very excited to not only release this, but also have it off my list of things to do. Check it out. This is more about the intermediate thing, right? The kind of background behind the magic, the mysticism of the Christian witch's journey. If, though, you don't want to grab a book just yet, that's totally fine. I understand. Scope out the zone first. Check it out. Go ahead and like this video, subscribe, and ring the bell, because we post educational Christian witchy topics on this channel every single Friday. And if you want these videos 2 weeks early and ad-free, you already know, head over to my Patreon, where I post these videos and a whole lot more every single week. He's a doobie man, he's a doobie man, he's a doobie man, he's a doobie man. He's a doobie man. Oh no. A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, they say. Anyway, all that aside now, let's talk a little bit about St. Lucy's Day. So December 13th is the feast day of St. Lucy, or Santa Lucia, or the many other ways that she is often referred to. And St. Lucy, traditionally in her lore as a saint, is thought to be a Christian woman around like the 300s CE in Sicily, who was put to death for being a Christian in a time when the empire was still largely, pagan, Roman pagan, all that kind of stuff. Legend has it that, as a lot of these female saints seem to be dealing with, she had a suitor who was upset that she had taken a vow of chastity and therefore decided to narc on her to the government and get her killed. In all seriousness, not like pour one out for every female saint whose story has to do with, men being a menace. But nonetheless, that's how the story goes generally, and so she was venerated as a saint. She did all kinds of miracles. Cool. And in those legends, this article that I was reading is really interesting. It kind of goes and explores like why Saint Lucy is considered the patron saint of like eyesight and vision and things like that, and also light. Obviously her name, Santa Lucia, luce meaning light itself, might just be like one of those cases where, you know, this is like a kind of legendary saint, a legendary figure, and therefore her association has to do with her name. Just like you got Saint Christopher being, right, the Christ bearer, or Saint, or Maurice being of the Moors, or whatever else is going on in there. And also, there are some legends that just kind of, like Dante out here really focusing on her eyes, that made people think that she was associated with eyesight, and then started inventing rumors that, you know, in her martyrdom, her eyes were gouged out. This paper says all kinds of interesting stuff like that, really trying to explore how we got here and like why we think what we think about St. Lucia and her associations. But eventually she was martyred, and she has been venerated as a saint pretty much since then. However, as you'll notice, she was martyred in Sicily. And so looking at that, I said, how then did the St. Lucy's Day tradition, which is now so iconic and so recognizable, become a tradition in Sweden? Because if I look at a map, Sicily, Sweden, they don't have like a lot to do with each other. Now I looked up and down, but I really couldn't find much. If I look at the official like tourist websites of Sweden, they will tell you the fact that like it is a tradition and it is something that is very special to Swedish people. But the only indication I have at all of where and why this started in Sweden for a Sicilian martyr is this Reddit post, which let me just, as an educator, I have to say, I have to put on record, Reddit is not a source. So it's not, this isn't like, I'm not saying this is gospel truth. I'm just saying that this is the only even remotely sensible theory I can find. I have tried to investigate this claim. I've not seen any other credible sources of it, but this is an idea at least. So if there's any like maybe newspaper clippings or anything like that, that might probably explain it. I just couldn't find them. But this Reddit commenter alleges that there was a beauty pageant around like 1927, 28 in Sweden that focused on some obscure local tradition. And because it became this kind of more national beauty pageant and focused on that, that just ended up solidifying the traditions of this day, which are pretty interesting. As I said, right, it's an iconic look, and for a reason. When we think of St. Lucy's Day, if you've ever seen anything like it, you've got a young girl dressed in white with an evergreen crown on her head that has candles sticking off of it. And if that don't look like some pre-Christian shit turned Christian, I don't know what the hell does. But the reality is that, like a lot of these holiday traditions that we think were kind of like always around or that we take for granted, right? Like the Christmas tree, like the Advent wreath. Once again, this Santa Lucia tradition, it's not like that old. It's definitely old, like it's been around, and especially locally, right? There is a lot of folklore around this as to why this happens, which definitely suggests that it was a smaller, local, tinier, like village to village tradition, but it wasn't widespread like we know of a lot of these other things until much more recently. And so the folklore, the reason around all of this, the reason why this is done, is because it's said that St. Lucy, when she was, a Christian, she would bring food to other Christians in the Roman Empire, especially prisoners or people hiding underground. And to light her way, she would wear a candle crown, basically. She would put the candles on her head in this kind of crown fashion so that her hands were free to carry more food. So you'll see typically these young girls, right, usually like, I don't know, anywhere from 10 to 16, 18, whoever is chosen by the village to represent St. Lucy will have that crown of candles on her head, and maybe will go bearing gifts or some kind of, snack, some kind of sweet roll, breads, anything like that. And she will be followed in a procession by, star boys, I guess, however they're called, and, other young girls, and also by kids dressed as tomtenissar, which are like these basically elves. There are a couple different types of Scandinavian fae or elf known as the tomte and the nissa, who, kind of as fairies do, mess around in your house a little bit, can be a little bit mischievous. And I think they're also where our concept of like garden gnomes might come from, if I'm not mistaken. So that's always fun. But yeah, so there's also, you know, the Santa Lucia songs, or Sancta Lucia as the Swedish say. And they got that whole kind of tradition going, and it looks very like obviously repurposed pre-Christian stuff, but it's not really that much, right? The color white is, you know, to represent like the innocence of martyrs and all that kind of stuff. The crown itself, I mean, evergreen, right? If you're gonna be a Swede, you're gonna have a lot of that around. And it probably does have some holdover from, again, those pre-Christian times, considering that the entire festival of Yule originates in that area. But just like most, you know, pre-Christian traditions into active Christian traditions, this is yet another festival that just signifies a light in the darkness, right? That reminds us of light in the darkness. You've got this young maiden, typically young maidens being representative of spring in, you know, folklore or anything else like that, coming through the snow, coming through the cold, with a crown of evergreen on her head, with the light coming off her head. It kind of bears some semblance to like other kind of folkloric figures, right? You have like Germanic Christkind, you have Slovenian Božić, right? These kind of like little Christmas or little God that really just like, they're not necessarily exactly Jesus, but they have some kind of like spirit of God-child around them. They're very weird. I know specifically as a Slovenian it gets like triple dicey because we have Dedek Mraz, which is kind of like a holdover from like communist times when, you know, the Soviet Union had Ded Moroz. We had something similar as Yugoslavia before it all fell apart, and we just repurposed it into Dedek Mraz. It means the same thing. It means like Father Frost, basically, or Grandpa Frost. We also have Miklaus, which is Santa. Just straight up is Santa, right? Nicholas, Miklaus. So there's Santa, and then there's also Božić, which is like, again, like little God is what it means, and it's kind of like that sort of Christkind type figure, some kind of like angel baby or something. And it's all just kind of, they're all three of them all at once in the Christmas season in Slovenia. So we could see something similar is happening here, and we have these like Saint Lucy songs that are all about like, you know, darkness and all these shadows and winter, kind of just being pushed back on by this young girl with her crown of light. So it's really interesting. It's really cool. And for anyone of Swedish descent, I mean, this seems to be like a really big, you know, big deal, big festival culturally, right? And this is to my point that a lot of these traditions that people are like, oh, this was pagan, and then Christians, you know, stole it. Well, these people didn't think of these traditions as like non-Christian. They didn't really think of these traditions as pagan, so much as they just thought of it as their specific cultural traditions, which is why they were so readily repurposed to begin with. It wasn't that the church stole it. In fact, the church really would have rather people not do these traditions at all anymore, would have rather they left all that behind, which is why they tried so hard to demonize and, you know, dissuade people from honoring these figures at all. But still, these kinds of folk traditions, these little local village traditions, they weren't just about being pagan. Being pagan didn't mean anything like it does now when we think of religion and converting to different religions. These were marks of culture, of tribal association, of identity, and that's why it's really important. That's why they were incentivized to carry these over into a new faith context to begin with. So it's really cool to see that, right? When I see the St. Lucy's crown, it reminds me a lot of the Advent wreath, actually, because, right, think about it. It's literally like if you just took the Advent wreath and put it on your head. So, as you can see, these kind of like, whether it's Scandinavian, more in the north up there, or more like towards the west, those Germanic things, it seems we have that similar concept of wreath of greenery candles. It's just something that seems to happen all over. So it's really cool. It's really interesting. And it's definitely something to observe. St. Lucy is a very fascinating saint with a lot of interesting folklore and different things like that. And I definitely think that if you wanted to observe this, if you are someone who has trouble with, you know, sickness or with eyesight issues, maybe the saint is near and dear to you. But she's also kind of like a precursor to the Christmas festival. Some speculate that because once upon a time the Julian calendar was used and they had their darkest night of the year, their solstice around the 13th, 14th, that this might be why that this is this day. But nonetheless, no matter what happens with it, however you want to observe it, if you want to do a novena, if you want to just kind of like, I don't know, make some bread for St. Lucy's Day or light some candles, whatever it is, what's also really interesting is that St. Lucy's Day marks the next set of Ember days, which aren't really super in fashion anymore. The Catholic Church kind of said we don't need to observe those anymore, but they're still very important. These are 4 times in the year around solstices and equinoxes when new clergy are sworn in and robed, I guess, however, when they're officially made clergy. And it's also traditionally, right, in the olden days, it was a time where people were encouraged to do something like a Lenten fast. If you know anything about Lent, the Lenten fast is that kind of thing where, right, you don't eat meat on Fridays, and on Ash Wednesday and Good Friday especially, you fast, as in you really only have like 1 meal a day, and you just kind of basically deny yourself a little bit. In a Lenten context, this is out of like penance and somberness, because we're thinking about the story of Jesus's death and before we get to his resurrection, right? In Lent, it's all about, remembering that Ash Wednesday, from dust we were made, to dust we'll return. Good Friday, right? That's the day Jesus dies. So it's more of a sad context of fasting and a penitential, like repenting and all that kind of stuff context in Lent. Ember days are not the same in that, though. We're fasting, but not because we're sad, not because we're thinking about, penance, but because we are instead giving thanks. We fast so that we can kind of disconnect ourselves from our bodies and our struggles in the material world, so we can literally kind of force ourselves to step back and almost like unchain ourselves from our bodies, and therefore all of the physical woes and mess that gets us so in our own head and distracted and just kind of like lost in the fog, basically. As you might imagine, when you're living your day-to-day life and all these things happen, it can really feel like sometimes what's going on around you is just like never-ending terror and mess and all this kind of crazy stuff. It could feel like all the stuff that's happening is like cataclysmic, especially if it's not going well, or that it's everything you could ever want and need if it's going well after all, right? When we fast, when we step back, we remind ourselves that what's going on in the world, whether for better or for worse, is not the most important thing. It's not the be-all, end-all, right? And so they'll happen on the Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday of whatever week comes after St. Lucy's Day, and also whatever week comes after, say, like Ash Wednesday, whatever week comes after, I believe, Pentecost, whatever week comes after, or around the autumn equinox. And again, it's a time for Thanksgiving. It's a time for fasting to remind yourself of things more important than what is on this earth. And it's also a time of charity, to give to charities and to show that you are thankful for what you have by sharing some of that with other people. And so, you do your fasting on Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. So 1 meal a day. On Friday, just like with Lent, you don't eat any meat at all. And you just kind of, do your prayers, do all your kind of stuff like that. And that, in my mind as a Christian witch, is a really interesting way to also make us think about the seasonal changes, right? Ember days are really fascinating to me because they just signify that pause, right? Like when everything is getting so, just shaken up in your head, when things are moving so quickly, right? We've got this holiday season going on. They really force you to stop, pause, and just recognize the change of seasons. Be grateful for the change of seasons. Reflect on what has happened. Think about what's to come, and really just like take yourself out of the constant stream of activity and center yourself a little bit. So I really like Ember days for that reason. I often fuck up on trying to actually like fast on these days. But I do try at least to observe them, to recognize them, and to take some time to recognize those changes in the seasons, those shifts in the year. And I also think it's just interesting how, again, for all people want to talk their shit about how, there's no magic, there's no witchiness in Christianity. When I see stuff like this, especially in liturgical calendars, it just reminds me that no, what we call witchcraft today, and the stuff people do, right? This marking of the seasons, this recognizing you know, the world around them and their own inherent connection to both the divine and the creation of the divine. That's something that has been inherent in every religion for like forever. And the only Christians who have lost sight of this are the ones who've disconnected themselves from the very root and logic and everything of their own spiritual traditions. These fucking goofy goobers out here saying that, you know, Halloween's a satanic holiday and blah, 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 and all this kind of stuff. All they do is show that they keep watering down, stripping away, and tearing up the actual anchoring, stabilizing points of spirituality that literally all religions have. And when I look at things like Santa Lucia and St. Lucy's feast day, when I look at things like Ember days that follow after, it just reminds me that it really doesn't matter at what corner of the world you're coming from. We are united in how we move and sway with the seasons, just the way that, like, you know, rocks and sand move and sway with the tides of the water. Bilog jumped on my camera and literally shut it off. You're lucky I thought to check it, you little shitbag. I don't know about you, but I have been watching a lot of some creators talk about influencers. I don't really pay attention to influencers online and the stupid shit they do because it's really none of my business and I just don't care. But after watching a few videos about this bullshit that influencers do and how they commercialize and make into corporate disaster things like Christmas, right? If I'm talking about, like, I was watching this video right here from this creator, and I think this is its own topic that I'm gonna have to get into from a Christian witch's perspective at some point, because what the fuck? So when I think about this and I think about how people commercialize and overconsume and do all these things to try and get some semblance of the holiday magic back, it just makes me think, like, is that the way? Is all of these super Christmas themed decor and shit the way to bring that feeling back? Or is it maybe the connection to our ancestors, the connection to our traditions, the connection to the rhythm of the world, the rhythm of spirit, of divinity, that we need to be looking at to get that feeling back? I don't think you can buy your way into that kind of spiritual, interesting feeling, that communal feeling that these influencers seem to be trying to buy into. So that's why I'm saying, look at things like St. Lucy's Day, like the Advent wreath, like Christmas trees and all these other kinds of things. Look at the liturgical calendar, the Ember days and all these other things, and recognize that this feeling of community, of pause, of Thanksgiving, of all these things, they're not rooted in just trinkets around your house, but in your connection with your God, your family, your friends, your community, your neighbor, and also with the creation that God has given us. I think if we focus on these things and we recognize that these many places where this kind of observance and reverence already exists within our liturgical life, we can get closer to, I think, what a lot of people have been seeking in this very commercialized corporate disaster that we're living in right now. So with all that said, I wish you all the very best. I hope that your holiday season is treating you well and continues to, and I hope that we are all getting ready for yet another turn of the wheel come 2026. See ya!